Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the Mediate.com Book Club. I'm Colin Rule, CEO of Mediate.com, and I'm really excited today to be visited by three very good friends, Julia, Leo, and Adi, talking about their new book, Solve, which is an amazing framework for mediation practice. I'm actually going to turn it over to the three of you to do a little bit of background and introduction, but I will just say, they are all affiliated with ADR Center, which is a world-leading organization in terms of promoting quality mediation and expanding the reach of mediation around the world. So it's a real privilege to have the three of you with us here today. So thank you so much for making the time. So Leo, why don't I turn it over to you to kick us off?
Thank you, Colin, for the kind invitation. Thank you, Mediate.com, for hosting the presentation. Actually, is the first time that we present the book worldwide. So you have like a premiere. It was published on just a few weeks ago, and it took only 3 years, maybe 4 years to
Only
write.
4 years, right?
Yes, to write this, to finalize actually this book. With me, my co-authors, Adi Gavrilă and Julia Radanova. And what we would like to do is just give present an overview of the book that is in three main parts, and Adi can show some slides, and then having some interaction with you, with the viewers, and to answer some questions. So first of all. Why this book? Why the world needed a new book on mediation? This book, if I can go backwards, actually is the outcome of a training manual that was developed over the years, especially in the last 3-4 years when we thought that there was a need of improving our training. And as you know, every training is a two-way, and we learn a lot from also the students. So each time we improved our training, we improved our training, our manual. And then at the end of a few years ago, we thought about we should turn this manual to a book, and this book reflects also, and then going backwards, the experience of all three of us, that of course we have in common to be the full-time mediators in three different jurisdictions, in Italy, in Romania, and in Bulgaria, and with different backgrounds. So I am not a lawyer. I'm an economist. Adi is an engineering, and he graduated from a school of law and has a PhD in constitutional law. And Julia is a lawyer and a mediator. And it reflects, of course, our international background. And also it reflects, the experience of ADR Center, who's kind of sponsored the book, because we realized of course, when we finalized the book, we had some offers from nice publishers, but we thought that it was easier to self-publish the book and keep the price quite low for a 508-page book, in order to, and it is the main goal of this book, to distribute in different continents and different people, so do not have a book that is high priced, and written in a different, a little bit is something in the middle between an academic book and a practical manual. So we invested a lot also in the design. But going back to the experience that you can find in the book is not only our own experience as authors, but is the experience of ADR Center. You introduced my actually main job is running ADR Center. ADR Center now is one of the largest, maybe the largest private mediation provider in Europe. We manage more than 8,000 civil and commercial cases, not consumer cases, civil commercial cases, 8,000, and with headquarters in Rome, more than 50 offices all around Italy. Now we have we are starting a big operation in Dubai, and we have, of course, partners all around the world. So this is also, is clear in the book that this experience as well as to run a mediation center and the relation between mediation centers and mediators. So the idea of the book is now the book is divided in three parts. The first part is to the context, the bringing mediation in the current time. So we titled Evolution of Mediation, and there are three chapters. So the idea is basically, I think, if really the world needed a new book on mediation, we have to think that we are in 2025. And mediation, I think, like in a lot of fields of business, changed a lot after pandemic for many reasons. So we dedicated one chapter for the past, the present, and the future of mediation. We tried to link about, again, the evolution of mediation, starting from the 70s with the Pound Conference, with the rise of mediation in the United States, and with the difficulties also to mediation, to increase mediation demand in Europe. And we think that a turning point for mediation was in 2020, and we dedicated a chapter for three main reasons. One was adoption of the Singapore Convention. I think is great as like promoting mediation international and be the same league of arbitration with the New York Convention. After, of course, 2020 was, more or less the years of the pandemic. So with the technology, now it changed the way we mediate. Everywhere in the world, 70%, maybe more of mediation is done online. And also we witnessed, at least in this part of the world, the first result of the legislation frameworks based on some sort of soft mandatory mediation. There are a lot of level of mandatoriness of mediation. There is not only one type of mandatory mediation, but this is some, I know a lot of now jurisdictions are adopting this model, not because based on opinion, on wishful thinking, but based on really data and statistics. So, and then we talk about, 7 emerging trends in mediation. I just, mentioned a couple, of course, technology, specialization in mediation. We are thinking that we are more and more users are asking for mediators specialized in some specific field, like construction, medical malpractice, IP, and so on. And we are also witness the rise of mediation center, mediation administered by centers, like in the States, AAAs, or JAMS, ADR Center, CEDAR, ICC, and so on. Then, and of course, we have we touch about mediation fundamentals again with this new approach of our sectors. But what I think is something, and that this is reflect actually our background, European background. that mediation needs a market first. There's some authors from, colleagues from especially from the States, for you guys, you give the market of mediation as a given because it's already there. Maybe 20, 30 years ago, not, but now, of course, there is a good demand of mediation. In our part of the world, in order to offer mediation services as a mediator or mediation centers, first you have to create a market. Okay, you have to transform the needs of mediation in the demand of mediation, in paying demand of mediation. So that's why we dedicated a chapter. We don't have time to go deeply in this chapter, but basically this is what we experience in Italy, in Bulgaria, in Romania, in a lot of countries. Now we're working a lot in Dubai, as I mentioned, in Turkey, we work in Turkey, in Greece, and so on. So the idea that we develop also a strategy, a three-track methodology in building and creating a mediation ecosystems based on demand and supply. And the demand is always driven by some sort of nudge. In our experience, unfortunately, I say unfortunately, the demand of mediation will not create by itself. I mean, the market is not. There are so many barriers and impediments to start mediation that is impossible. And again, it's not our opinion. So the governments and the needs to put in place a nudge, a push in the right direction, but not also in terms of governments, but also in terms of large organizations. Think about international organization or large private organization that can have their own internal rules to embed mediation corporate policies within their ecosystem. So after this part, so we dedicated about more than about 60 pages on this setting of mediation in the nowadays. And then in part two, part two is the core of mediation, and just I will introduce a little bit. Again, we started to introduce our matrix, our methodology that Adi will explain in details. But the idea is, so I think the next slide is, we thought really, we need clarity. We need for sure clarity to start these wonderful and challenging professions. That is very difficult, of course, and the idea to give a little bit of rational in something that's sometimes when you start is not rational at all. So in front of you, Adi, there is a kind of so basically. If you remember when you start to learning mediation, and it was not clear to us. I mean, I remember my first training in mediation was in 1999 by one of a great friend of ours, Dwight Golan. Actually, it was in Boston. And then I learned mediation by shadowing. This is a great way to learn. And so the question is the possible cause. Why? What causes this lack of complete clarity? What is the problem or the dispute? Possible solution, a better correlation between conceptual models, why, and practical models, how to do it. And more clarity for young mediators and prospective users to give a map, to refer to. And so there have been, around a lot of great books where everyone learned about mediation. Chris Moore, then Jay Folberg and Dwight Golan, and a lot of others, of course, Bob Bush and many others. From the European perspective, actually, all these books, most of the books are from your side of the world. So maybe there was a need of another perspective. And again, I think we are in that because, of course, the academic research and on negotiation and mediation was born and developed in the US, and all of us, we learned a lot. We stole a lot. We stole a lot from you guys, and then and the idea is really, as I told you before, I mentioned, the world needed a new book on mediation. There are a lot of good books, great books on mediation already in the market. And so we thought, okay, maybe we have something to say. Maybe with our experience, again, we are not full-time professors, we are not full-time trainers, but with our experience, we can add some value and think about what to achieve, what to do, how to do, with which tool we can do it. And so basically, the idea is when you start mediation, I think is the next slide, you are in front of the mediation table with a lot of facts, opinions, emotions, objective criteria, all mixed up in front of you on the mediation table. And then you have to think about the past with one eye, what happens, the fact, the past relationship. You have to think about the level of the conflicts, and why these guys they were not able to reach an agreement by themselves. I mean, our work as mediators started from an unsuccessful negotiation, always from a broken negotiation. We have to think about why the negotiation was not successful, which barriers we as mediator can help to overcome to our users. And then at the same time, okay, you have to think about you have to look at the present, you have to deal with people. Another thing that maybe a lot of people forgot that even if in a mediation, a business-to-business mediation, where banks, large corporation are present, you deal with people. We deal only with the humans, and with humans, we are wired in the same way how to take decisions. So we have to deal with men and women, and we have to understand how men and women and humans will take decisions. And then at the same time, we have, as a mediator, think about, look at the future, about, possible solution, possible interest, future relationship. If the mediation will be able to restore the relationship, it's like in a couple or in a business to business, or you have just to manage a nicely happy divorce, and where the parties will never get together anymore. So for doing this, the first step is, past, present, and future. Think about past information, the agenda. Present is interest and option. Again, looking at the future. And again, with our experience and our way to try to rationalize this kind of confusion, and using a matrix, a model that is very important, that could work in almost every field of disputes, for every value of the dispute, small or complex, in every jurisdiction and culture. We can come up with this matrix that we call solve and task matrix. Then Adi is going to unveil what solve means.
Thank you. Thank you, Leonardo. But I would like to just push pause here for a moment, if I may, Colin, to see if you have immediate reflections to what Leonardo has presented, or any questions, and then I'll be happy to share my screen and then go back. The problem, Colin, is that you invited three authors to speak, and it's like you just have too many chefs in the kitchen, and we may not even end up having questions. So let's push pause for a moment, see if there are any questions or reflections. I promise to go back and share more.
No, Adi, I think it's perfect to have the three of you. Leonardo is the primi piatti, you're the secondi piatti, and then Julia can do the cannelloni at the end. It will be perfect, I know. But I think, Adi, we should charge forward because you have a lot to cover. And let's do a Q&A at the end. There were lots of things Leonardo touched on that I'd like to loop back on, and we have a couple things in the chat. But I suggest we charge ahead, unless anyone has any clarification questions they'd like to raise before Adi proceeds. Adi, why don't you take it from here? Let's proceed with the matrix. Yep.
Sure, absolutely. Always useful to take the room temperature. First of all, this is something we developed trying to get better in actually transferring know-how to young mediators. We are always looking back, thinking, can we get better at this? Like really to make sure that we transfer knowledge, we are able to develop the skills. And we were always thinking, how can we do this better and better and make it clearer for people? What could we do? How could we do that? And then how can we actually encompass a process that is supposed to be so flexible, that is absolutely like different every time, depending on the case, depending on the people? Can we actually put a line around it and consider a framework to put it in that framework? And we believe we landed on something, because this matrix is actually able to harmonize conceptual stages as to goals for each stage of the process with procedural stages, which are things that we do during each stage of the process, or we could do. And let me explain for a moment what that means. Basically, the 5 stages are called set, open, listen, validate, and enable. And the first one refers to the actual preparation for mediation, convening the parties, convening their, facilitating their decision to engage, noting their shared appetite for dialogue, making sure everyone is prepared. So when we have the start of the process, we have everyone saying, we have the right people in this process, we have the right conditions for dialogue discussed and agreed, everyone was properly consulted, we feel prepared, all the documents were shared, we're ready to go. And that's all about that first step. As we know, as professional mediators, sometimes it's more important than the actual mediation, or for sure is longer in terms of time that you have to put in. Then the second stage, which we call open the process, is the stage where usually, based on our practice, now we are talking about things that we do, and we are creating a framework based on our practice. Based on our practice, again, we're talking Europe, perhaps West Asia and North Africa. Mostly, we do start with a joint session with all parties together, but that's not necessarily the case. That's why we call this second stage open the process, to accept that we might actually start a mediation process with private sessions, but there is some sort of opening. And then at the end of that stage, the actual output we are looking for is to actually agree the language that describes the issues. This is one of the reasons we don't find solutions, because we sometimes don't even agree the language that describes the problems that we're trying to resolve. So that's what we're trying to do at the end of this stage. And then we move into the most counterintuitive stage, as we know, in the mediation process, where although people may be ready to raise their sleeves or their shirts and say, okay, let's negotiate, let's put those numbers, we know that we're saying, let's push pause, let's explore these issues a little bit, try to understand why they're important for people, is the stage of listening, as we called it. Obviously, we needed an L for solve, but jokes aside, it's our way to tell young mediators, keep on listening. because we're not there yet. We're still preparing for the negotiation process. That is actually starting in the validate stage when we're brainstorming with parties around possible options for next steps that harmonize their top priorities, as we know that we are doing in the listen stage. And then the last stage is called enable resolution, where we're bringing the parties together to really capture their conclusions and their agreements if they have one. And then for each of these 5 stages, we analyze targets or goals, goals to be reached by both mediators and parties, thanks to some of the eminent mediators that we consulted in developing this matrix. And I will mention Bill Marsh, actually, who told us, let's think about the parties and their lawyers, because they also have their goals. It's not only our goals as mediators. So we want to think about that, but then we think about activities, which are physical actions that we might perform to achieve those goals. And then strategies, things are becoming even more flexible, how we might put those actions in motion. And then we talk about keys, which are like tools, tangible resources, frameworks, checklists, whatever you want. We can look in any field, from conflict analysis to communication, from negotiation to game theory, if you will. Any book that we will read probably will give us a tool or two or more that we can immediately place in our matrix, because this is the idea with the matrix. It's not its content, and I will show you its content in a moment, at least based on our analysis. It's actually the toolbox. It's the actual, my father was a technician. And when he would buy a new toolbox, he was so happy because he was showing us, look, I know where to put this. I will put it here. I will put this. I will put it here. So for him, it was easy to access his tools in a conscious manner. And this is what we're saying with this matrix. We're just offering a toolbox for people to use, and for young mediators more precisely to use when starting to learn this skill, because otherwise we all know we tend to offer a mechanical process, at least at the beginning of our process or of our practice. And to move forward, because I would really want to get to those questions, Colin and everyone, as Leo said, this is a system that has wide applicability. It may be that we're talking about a one-on-one case, a family relationship, or a neighborhood, or workplace, or business relationship, or we're talking about a construction case with multiple parties, or maybe a company community case with 100,000 people on one side. It has the same type of application and flexibility, because it's up to you, the mediator, to decide which tool you want to take from the toolbox at any point in time. But however, the concepts remain. And if you will, as you move from targets down to strategies and skills, there is more and more flexibility. Obviously, there are a number of ways we can achieve goals, and that feeds into jurisdiction, it feeds into mediation style, and all the ideologies that are governing our approach to mediation. This is the matrix. Actually, this is how it started. 3 or 4 years ago, we were using this. These were our secret sauce, if I could call it. We just placed all the things we did in a matrix, and we've been using this for our mediation. And then we've been using this when we were training, and then we decided to write a chapter about any of these things. So that's it. This is the idea of the matrix. It started with what we all see on screen, and this is by far not comprehensive. There are so many things anyone can add. Actually, just a couple of days ago, a lawyer asked me, why do you have so many? And I said, you know what? There used to be close to 500 elements, but we brushed so many because we don't want that many. And actually, you can make thousands. You can add thousands, if you will. It's the thinking. It's the type of thinking around how you organize all these things that we're offering, actually. In terms of going back to the book, and then I'll close, we have different items that we analyze for each of these things. May they be targets or strategies or activities or tools or keys or skills. We're trying to define concepts. We're trying to provide a description of concepts. Then we reference online mediation for all these things where relevant, at least. Because nowadays, as Leonardo mentioned, most things are online, more than 50% probably. And we have to acknowledge that the world has changed. So even the way we mediate has changed. and then some useful questions and comments, some boxes that could be helpful for people, and then a summary perhaps at the end. So we can actually have a not like a textbook for researchers, but mostly a guidebook for practitioners that we can always go back to. And I would not be surprised to see that different types of mediation will develop their own matrices, their own types of tools and skills and strategies, and perhaps different sectors will look at different things that would look to adapt this matrix in different way and come up with the matrix that is relevant, more relevant for the IP sector, for example. You see on screen one slide that describes the targets or the goals for mediators as well as the activities for the first stage, such as conduct your conflict analysis in terms of targets, or map stakeholders in terms of activities, things to do before the mediation starts. And finally, and I'll close here and I'll turn it to you, Julia, some targets and activities for the lawyers and parties, because there is a capacity building role that we have as mediators. We're there to support, to offer assistance and guidance so that participants in our processes are actually guided by us in terms of how to approach, where are we coming from, and why would be important for us, at least in terms of mediators, advisors, advocates, and other experts joining the people that are trying to resolve their to make progress in their conversations. We want to be on the same page and really work together, as opposed to end up confusing them in a way that is probably gonna make them say, you know what, why don't we try to settle this alone without these people, because just making things more complicated for us. Thank you very much, and back to you, Colin or Julia. Feel free to come in whenever.
Julia, why don't we just go to you, please?
Okay,
Adi, that was great.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, thank you, Adi. Thank you, Leo. I would just take the chance just to say that what we've just seen is that we're coming from practice to theory, and now we're back to practice. And that's ideally what part 3 is about. It's about case studies. It's about how to make out of this methodology something practical, how to break it down, the architecture, if you like, into small pieces and translate it into practice. So in fact, part 3 gives us a single-page blueprint, I would say, which invites or is suggested for mediators to really see how they can apply this 5x5 matrix into something workable that they can directly go and improve their practice with. So ideally, what we have here, we start this part with chapter 11, which is the structure of the SOLVE mediation canvas. And as I said, the canvas is our blueprint. It's just one single page that you can see right here. And that one page can be used by anyone who wants to really structure the process and give it some momentum, be more conscious about the stages, the strategies that one applies, the activities, the skills, the tasks, and everything that goes into the magic of mediation, as you, Colin, pointed out. So this is what actually this mediation canvas looks like. As I said, it's just this single page. And what we decided to do in order to really illustrate the whole ideas that are there is to walk us, to use one case. It's actually a commercial case, but we have this chapter 12 that applies the canvas to this particular case. So you can see the fruitful expedition. But the idea there is that we show our readers how you can take this canvas, apply it to your own practice, and benefit from this. Basically, the chapter 12 gives us an elaboration of that, whereas in chapter 13, we actually broaden the lenses. What we decided is to select 5 different cases coming from totally different fields, just to make the argument that the mediation is something universal. It's a tool, but that tool fits into different contexts. And I think that's really where the beauty of it comes, because you can take it and apply it to so many different fields. And we try to illustrate that by having just a short vignettes from like a family split, this family dispute we took, or a workplace dispute, company, community one, consumer conflict, and victim offender mediation even, to walk the readers and demonstrate how the same framework, the very same framework actually, can flexes across cultures. It can apply to different sectors. It can apply even to cases that seemingly are power imbalanced, and they may not apparently on the surface look fit for mediation, but through the application of this structured approach, well, we can actually give some benefits, some extra value to the parties that are coming to our mediations. So taken together, all of that, actually, all the chapters of the third part of the book effectively brings us this the theory back into practice. And I think that was actually our motto when with Leo and Adi, we were talking and said, okay, what we want is actually from practice to theory and then back again. So that became the final stage. And what we try to show is that well-designed question, disciplined listening, as Adi was just saying, you have to listen and listen and listen and spend as much time as necessary for each of the stages is required in order to really have a process that's driven by the parties, as I'm reading in the chat, the argument was raised, but at the same time, it's not designed in a fixed way, but it's an ever-evolving matrix. And Colin, going back to your comment in the chat, like, do we devote? Do we separate? It's a live process, and that's what part 3 wants to make the argument, is that you apply it according to the context in which the matrix should be put. And by choosing those different 5 cases, we want to make an illustration of that the context doesn't matter, the tool is universal. And that bridge actually turns the matrix from something on paper to something that's alive. It can be used, and it's in the hands and maybe in the brains of the mediators that put their trust into the matrix and just try to see how it is. And I thank you for everyone participating here, and maybe Colin, back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to the 3 of you for laying it out. You have a lot of very experienced mediators here on the call, so I'm sure people are going to have a lot of opinions about this. But let me just start off. I loved, Adi, what you said, because when the first time I saw the book, I was like, "Oof, okay, man, this could block a pretty sizable door." It was a little intimidating. But once I got into it, I found it was very intuitive. And most of the material you have in the book is support material to the core framework. And that's why I really want to focus on the framework, because I think it is really interesting. Adi, one of the things that you said is the matrix isn't really an agenda per se. It's more of a toolbox, right, that people draw upon. And I think that that's true. When I was first trained in mediation by Jennifer Beard, I saw you had her book up. That was the model I was trained in. So uninterrupted storytelling, assisted storytelling, joint problem solving. I really, as a new practitioner, I'm like, just tell me what I need to do. What is step 1? What's step 2? What's step 3? And that's what I really like about the SOLVE framework. I think it does provide a really great framework for a new practitioner to think through what are the stages we go through in a mediation. But the tasks part, I think, Adi, really feels to me like the toolbox. There's so many ideas, so many things I can draw on. And, I think, Julia, you made this point too. We talk about the art and science of mediation, right? Part of it is there's a structure, there's tools that you can train someone on, but it's also a little bit like jazz, right? You have to read the room, you have to react to the parties. And I think one of the beauties of mediation is people can pick it up pretty quickly. You could take a 40-hour training and, have a good handle on it, but 20 years later, you're still fascinated by it because there's so much nuance, there's so many difference. Every dispute is a snowflake. So I just wanted to talk to you guys. One of the questions that I put was, do you have a sense of how much energy, in the SOLVE framework? Normally when I was taught about the opening statement, they said, try and get that over quick so you can get into it, Now, I mean, you got to have the agreement to mediate. You have to buy in from the parties. But sometimes I see new mediators, they just go on and on and on, providing the framing content. And the parties are like, what are we doing here? Is this like a training? But, do you have a sense of where the meat of the process is, the bulk of the work is in the SOLVE stages?
Well, So sorry, I mean, just depends, of course, case by case. As you know,
Sure.
some cases will take a lot of preparation on the S, some more on the last. But I think this is my perspectives that the core of the is in L and V is in listening, understanding, and validate options. That basically, I mean, a couple of years ago, it was not 5x5, it was 4x4, because there was only one phase for what we call the private meetings or caucus. So we thought that we should make clear to divide the first round of private meeting in listening, understanding, and to the second rounds of private caucus in putting on the table option, ranking option, and so on. And I think this is the peculiarity of a mediation, something that, of course, you don't have in arbitration, in judicial proceedings, in all others proceedings. And this is what a mediator can bring to the table as value. Adi, you may also.
Yes, I have many opinions about this, actually. The short answer, Colin, is it depends. In my view, I can imagine some types of cases where I spent a lot of time with the preparation. And then in one day, we come in and we cover all the other 4 stages in a few hours. Done. And maybe we spend maybe weeks or days or maybe even months before just to negotiate the conditions for mediation. But I've had mediations that I call actually those cases, I actually call them mediation with capital M, that may take months or even years. Those large public disputes that involve communities and companies and maybe governments, and then you have like 50,000 people on one side of the table, and you need months to even decide their representation process and work with them to identify their representatives and make sure they have the right capacity to engage, and that takes time. And in those cases, I can imagine different weight in terms of more time on the V, maybe more time on the L. So it depends. But I will say something, and then I'll close. You know, sometimes us, we think too much about our ideology. We like to identify, you know, our ideology, the things we believe, the process we follow. And in all honesty, parties don't care so much about that. They just want our help. So all I will say is this: it depends what parties want. If they want to spend more time in whatever stage, I'll stay with them as long as they need and as long as that will be helpful to them. And that's why it depends with every type of case and every person I will mediate with.
Fit the form to the fuss. Yeah, Julia, one of the points that you made that I think really resonated, I've seen lots of presentations of frameworks for mediation or parenting coordination or many different aspects of dispute resolution that sound beautiful when they're laying it out, you know, like here's all the steps. But then you get in the room when you're actually in a dispute and you try and deploy the framework and it doesn't work. The parties don't respond the way the framework says that they're supposed to respond, or they're looking for something that's not called out in the pathway. And I love part 3 because you're sort of putting it to the test a little bit. You know, we've come up with this great, I mean, solve and tasks, and oh, okay, it looks great, here's the matrix. But when you apply it to disputes and you can see this actually does work, and when you read the scenario, it scans, you feel like this is the way that people would behave in these cases. I think that really makes it real for people. And a lot of the bulk of the book is you doing that. You're not just presenting the framework and saying, okay, good luck. You're actually putting it into real world circumstances. I actually think you need to now print, I'm sorry to give you more work. You need to print out like worksheets that have the solve framework, you know, that you could hand out, or like a one laminated card with the framework on it that a mediator could carry in their backpack. So they could say, let's take a break. And they go out and look at it and say, aha, here's some more ideas. I think the book is great because it validates how deep your knowledge and your thinking about it goes. But I think it could also be raised up. Like Jim was asking, you know, he wants to hear about options in terms of what could be required. Sometimes you don't have the luxury of going through the full process. So is there an opportunity to shave it down? How, you know, if you have, and Jim, I don't know if you want to elaborate on the question, but, you know, like Leo, you're talking about mandatory mediation. Usually that just gives you kind of an opening conversation with the parties, you know, and they decide whether or not they want to proceed. So which part of the framework is most important to do? Because I agree with you. You posted John Haynes' book cover, And I think John Haynes said the ideal mediator would just ask questions. That's all they would do. So maybe you could come in that initial meeting, you do a little of the L, and then if they decide to continue, well, then you can go back and do some O and then do a little V. So, Jim, did you want to elaborate further on your question?
Well, I don't know if this is global. I think it might actually be, which is, at least in America, I think people resist what they're required to do. You know, I mean, they don't, or at least a part of them resists. Okay, and so I think you could make an argument that what's the minimum that we could require that would really create results? You know, it might be an opt-out system, it might be an online form, it might be showing up for a 30-minute information session, but I'd be very intrigued that there would be research done on what really tips the balance in terms of results. I'll quickly illustrate where for people to commit to mediation, I'm thinking more garden variety cases, not huge public policy cases, but for our typical cases, it's kind of new, it's kind of scary, it's a big decision to commit. And so I wonder whether there's some midpoint step where they can put their toe in the water to ask any questions they might have, to get some counsel, some advice. So I've been thinking something like a mediation information specialist who would not be the mediator, but who could have a private confidential discussion with them about the mediation opportunity.
Like a pre-mediation.
A pre-mediation. And in fact, I'm thinking that courts and agencies might be willing to even pay for a half hour, you know, of this, and that would dramatically elevate the number of people moving into mediation, and once they're in, I think we can do the magic. I'm not concerned. So anyhow, the issue of, you know, what's the minimum amount we could require that would really make a difference?
I love this question, Jim, and this is what we have been doing for the last couple of decades, at least in Italy. So I'm sharing my experience on data and statistics, not my opinion, really. So in Italy, we have a legislation in the last 15 years, and we as a country, because we keep statistics, all mediation centers, we had more than 2 million mediation, 2 million cases, okay? And I'm talking about not consumer cases, civil, commercials, real estate, neighbors, inheritance cases, and so on. So the magic, what is the magic? The magic, and I've done with my colleagues thousands of these first mediation sessions where the parties are nudged to be attend in person, the clients with the lawyers, and a lot of times they are there just to put a signature and go to the court, and it's like a lip service. But the magic is to nudge again, to push the parties in the same room at the same time with the professional mediators, and to reconnect communication. That's it. The legislation, it could be a contract clause, could be a policy in a corporation, it could be, in our case, a legislations, where the legislation say, by the way, before going to the court and spend resources of taxpayers in courts and spend, you know, the precious resources of judges and staff courts, just sit around the table. Just sit around the bed and talk.
Could it be all online if the parties were agreeable?
It could be online, but not on the phone. This is clear in our law. It could be online in a mediation center accredited by the Minister of Justice with a professional mediators, means accredited mediators. And we have now we have to give availability up to 2 hours. So 2 hours of time, of course, they can leave before. But in the law, there is a line where the parties have to attend this meeting in person and in good faith. So we have now some decision of judges where they say, no, you didn't attend in good faith because you spent 5 minutes in mediation. Here is the, so. or you do not attend in good faith because there was no one from the company that knew about the case, or you send a young lawyer and was just to say. So the judge sent back the parties to attend in good faith. And the results are incredible. Almost 50% of the times the parties, they agree and then voluntary to go to full mediation. So the mandatory part is just to talk to each other again. And then the parties, they take a rational, informed decision to go to full mediation. So the idea is, I think what it worked at least again in this part of the world is sell mediation piece by piece. You have to sell the first piece of mediation with a fixed fee, and now is about the equivalent is around 100 euro, 250 euro per party, something that pays for 2 hours. So it's professional. It's not like a no-profit business or a voluntary work. It's a professional work for 2 hours. And again, 50% of the times, almost the parties decide to go opt in.
Okay, so now I have a hard question for you, which is, I think the reason that system works and has great prospect is because the court has authority, or an agency that's running the show, has authority.
Absolutely.
Is there any way, or how can we best make the mediation alternative available to people and known without them having to go to court? Or do you think that going to court is just a necessity?
As I say, I think now at least again, in Italy and many other jurisdictions, now mediation is integrated in the judicial system. So it's the first step. It's not either or, it's not alternative. I think the terms alternative is very misleading terms. Is more appropriate. So is mediation and court are the two sides of the same coin. And but you touch a point very important. It is in our law that actually is that if the invited party do not show up, they have sanctions. The judge can sanction if the invited party didn't attend for a good reason. The claimants or the requesting parties, of course, they have a sanction because they cannot go to the court. So they have to go there, they have to attend. But the problem is always the invited party. And in the last reform, we made the government, again, looking at the number, looking at the statistics, they made what they say a bigger stick, so big sanction, but a big carrots as well. So that we have a good incentives. They have a tax credit up to 600 euro per party that cover not only the mediation fees, but also the lawyer's fees for mediation advocacy. So, and it covers basically, so you can pay up to 600 euro. And of course, if they go up is higher fees, but usually it pays the first meetings. At least the first meetings is covered.
And just to end, but quickly, thinking in cumulative terms, I think from a business perspective, from a market perspective, there's a litigation market context for mediation where we benefit from the authority of a court requirement and the like. And then there's the pre-litigation market, which is much less organized. It's everywhere. It's everywhere, but there's not real authority to require it. So, and I think,
Adi, did you have a point on this that you wanted to make?
Yes, very, very quickly, time permitting. Thank you, Colin. We have to look around and we will see that different sectors are creating pre-action protocols. And I can give you, and I'm sure people connected here have also numerous examples of institutions, regulators, policies that more and more nowadays are actually looking to prevent rather than resolve, to contain, to intervene locally early, before things spiral out. And I think that's another starting point. Before things even break the surface of a company within the workplace, more and more organizations are setting up ombuds offices, workplace, and more organizations are creating dialogue-based functions where they usually and traditionally had only compliance-based functions. We just have to work with all these people that receive complaints and concerns from whatever. And I'm sure if we're paying attention, they're all asking, how can we get better in handling these things so that systemically our system is not suffering by all these problems becoming explosions. So I think there is a lot of work for all of us to do, Jim.
Well, the best way to resolve a dispute is to prevent it in the first place. So yeah, we're going upstream. Julia, do you have any final comments before we wrap up?
Yeah, Colin, many thanks. Actually, I just wanted to reflect back on what you started saying before the discussion about the mandatory aspect of mediation. It actually it goes back to how the metrics and the canvas tie together. And our idea basically, and we try to illustrate that in the part 3, is that when you receive a case, magic happens when you're well prepared. And our idea basically is that you have the metrics as the full toolbox, but then with the canvas, you actually fill it out. You prepare yourself. And then as you pointed out, you may start with L. You may start with the listening and understanding stage where you explore, where you are with the parties. But because of your preparation, because you have filled out the missing points, the gaps, you know what you're doing. You also project to the parties the confidence that you are the leader. The content of the conversation lies with them, but then you know what you need to guide them, what you need to cover. And I think also, be it for mediators, but also for other professionals, for lawyers who may want to be better professionals and generate more profit for their clients through the mediation, be it for HR professionals, for CEOs, for managers, from different professions, this matrix actually can be very beneficial because it prepares them to engage in a dialogue. And this dialogue, it's far beyond purely mediation. It's actually a way of handling, managing conflicts, preventing them, or effectively leading them to a position where they are settled and interests are sort of balanced out in a way that's peaceful. And I think that's the goal of the book, basically, to bring peace to conflicts, to resolve them in a way that's mutually satisfactory for everyone.
Fantastic. And that's a great summary. I think we leave it there. But I want to thank all of you for all the hard work you did. 4 years to build this book, but decades of experience that fed into it. I have to say, in the United States, the joint session is kind of under attack. And I love this book too, because it reemphasizes that's the heart of mediation. So thank you for all of you joining us here today. And I know all of the people who are going to stream this over the coming weeks may have questions for you, so they may reach out directly. But I really appreciate you taking the time, and thanks again for this great contribution to the field.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Mediate.com, for hosting us. And I'm sure we will meet again online or in person all over the world, as usual.